Okay, yep.
All right. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And it's really fun to be on home turf after giving this presentation already for several different clubs across the country and Canada as well. But it's always nice to be on your home turf. And, you know, I'm not going to fill in a lot other bio in terms of what Sandy said. I'm just going to add something, which is that I started out as a black and white photographer in high school. I had a darkroom in my basement. The only thing I had the capability of working on was black and white. When I picked up a camera much later in my life, I was already in the travel business. And so for years, I basically was a color, travel, nature, landscape, and then macro photographer. I really didn't delve into black and white at all. My real first exposure to some serious black and white was when I joined the Baltimore Camera Club, by far. I met people there that shot both color and black and white. And I met some people there that shot exclusively black and white. Some were analog at that time, and some were doing sort of straddling the line between analog and digital. And I quickly became very enamored of black and white photography. And of course, we've had presentations given to us over the many years about black and white photography. And what I took away from those presentations was the more common description, which was basically by taking color out of a file, you are removing a distraction. And therefore, what's left in the file, what's left in the image are what hopefully are the good bones of the image, the right, you know, the good composition, lines, patterns, shapes.
Jim, Louis, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Have you shared your screen? Do you?
I haven't shared it yet.
Okay, I just didn't know whether you had thought you had a
No,
screen.
no, no, no,
Okay,
no.
good, good.
I'm just about
All
there.
right, okay.
Uh, but I decided actually that that there was more to my attraction to black and white photography than just the fact that when you remove color, you're removing distractions. So at this point, I'll share my screen,
Okay, good.
and you can verify whether it is being shared. And I just need to switch over to a different screen. So now you should be seeing my
Yes,
Lightroom screen.
yes,
Okay.
we do.
All right, good. Now I'm going to minimize this whole thing. Okay. There we go. So the presentation is entitled From Capture to Print, The Art of Black and White Photography. What I hope to do in the next 75 minutes, sometimes it runs a little longer, sometimes it runs a little shorter, is give you sort of a comprehensive overview of my personal approach to what I discovered about black and white photography and how it related to my personal photography. So this is not meant as a technical presentation about how to achieve the best black and white conversions or really any of that. It's really more, this is much more of an emotional presentation than it is a technical presentation. So Sandy actually used this quote, which I wanted to start with, which was, a great photograph is one that truly expresses what one feels in the deepest sense about what is being photographed. And what that quote means to me is really pretty simple, which is that as a photographer, and I'll just keep it personal rather than saying as photographers, as a photographer, the process that I go through is translating the connection that I make with the subject matter to the viewer. Because in effect, that's what we're always trying to do. We're always trying to bring all of our lives experiences and our emotions and our feelings and our thoughts into our photography. And I tend to stipulate that the stronger that emotional connection is with your subject matter, the stronger your personal connection will be. That will be shown in the overall quality of your photography. And in turn, that'll be appreciated by the viewer, because I think in the end, what we really want people to do when they look at our photography, and you can probably say photography or art in general, is to feel something. It's really, to me, all about feeling more than anything else. So since we started with an Ansel quote, let's start with an Ansel image. What we're first going to do is review some images from photographers that I admire, that in some way influenced me. And at the same time, we'll just talk about some of these general theories about black and white photography and how it relates to me personally. So Ansel Adams was able to show in his absolutely stunning landscape photography his visceral connection with the environment. You can feel in one of, and not every Ansel is a masterpiece, but you can feel in much of Ansel's work that absolutely powerful connection that he had with the landscape. He was also an environmentalist. And that's why his photography is so stunning, beyond the fact that it's technically gorgeous and it has the range of tonalities and the shapes and the textures and everything else that we associate with black and white photography. It's more the feeling that you get when you're, especially if you're lucky enough to ever stand in front of one of Ansel's prints at a gallery, blown up to a pretty large size, because they're just really overwhelmingly impressive. This is by that photographer, Vivian Mayer, who was the nanny, but was always shooting pictures, and her work wasn't discovered until she passed away, and her negatives were auctioned off. She actually was a phenomenal street photographer, black and white for the most part. And what this image showed to me really quickly was it has all the elements of what makes a great black and white photo. It has the repetition of the benches. It has the patterns. It has the textures. But what it also has in it are these three people, the dad and the two kids. And the two kids are on roller skates, and one is just turning around, looking at I'm assuming, Vivian Mayer. And so what I've discovered was that the graphic context is only the starting point for an effective, emotive black and white image. In a lot of cases, it's the placement of not just people, as you're going to see, but human or sentient beings within the imagery that makes them as powerful as they are. This image by Cartier-Bresson, he was known to have been quoted as saying that he despised color photography because he lived long enough to shoot some color and know all about color photography. This is one of his earlier shots. Again, it's got that beautiful backdrop. It's got the rainy pavement. It's got the beautiful stairway going off to the left, the implied stairway going off to the right. But again, it's the addition of the figures, and not just the figures, it's the addition of that cat that really makes this image more dramatic and more atmospheric than the image would be without the figures. And that's what I am attracted to in black and white photography. It's the emotive power. It's the atmospheric power that it has when you put the right elements together. This is an image by Margaret Bourke-White. Wonderful black and white image, right? Beautiful tonality, great patterns, great repetition. But without the people, it becomes sort of an interesting snapshot of what a silk mill was like probably in the 40s or early 50s. With the placement of the people in this image, it gives the image so much more meaning as a viewer, because you connect with the people. You don't connect directly with the spools of thread. You're connecting more with the people, and you're wondering how long they stand at one of these shifts per day. Based on when this was taken, these people could stand on their feet for maybe, I don't know, 10, 11 hours a day working one of these looms. So again, it's the addition of people into these graphic contexts which makes the images so much more powerful. This image by Leonard Farkas struck me right away as well, and I love his photography. Again, a beautiful backdrop, but the addition of the dancer adds that human vulnerability and that air of Elegance and Sophistication, which I also think comes more with black and white color than color photography. You know, I'm also influenced by the great black and white movies that were made in the 30s, 40s, and even into the 50s. Alfred Hitchcock movies have had a really strong influence on my visual perceptions. So you just, influences come from many, many different places. Here's a Dorothea Lange image of this young girl staring into an empty fireplace. The light is coming from the left, her face is in shadow. You're just left to wonder, what is the story? You know, is she wondering whether there's going to be any wood for the fire tonight? Is she wondering whether there will be any food to even eat on this particular day? I noticed that the books up on the windowsill add another little element, because maybe there is some informal or more formal education going on. But Dorothea wants you to just look and think and gaze on the young girl and wonder what her story is. This is by a gentleman named Thomas Freed. You guys all know I'm a cat person, so I just really, I am attracted to pictures that have cats, but that use them in amazing ways. This is just a tremendously striking image, in that the backdrop again is beautiful. The architectural aspects of it are wonderful, the sconces, the rectangular windows, the archways, but it is by far these two cats that make this picture. The cat coming from a distance has a friendly look, tail up in the air, curious, whereas that cat in the foreground, tail down, definitely more tense. And you just know that in the next second or two, something really interesting is going to happen between these two animals. And it's the addition of that emotional quantity and quality that really makes this kind of image stand out. Bresson, again, he liked shooting urban scenes. He loved shooting in these narrow alleyways and down stairways and through doorways. And he's using this beautiful narrow alleyway as a really gorgeous leading line, again, leading you right to this situation that's going on. The man and a cat, you know, did they find each other while they sat down? Are they already associated with each other? You know, who found who? Why is the gentleman sitting on the curb? So what black and white is also really good for, at least in terms of me, is it's far better at expressing those feelings of loneliness and abandonment. And in general, I do associate black and white more with negative emotions than with positive emotions, which I do very heavily with color photography. Elliott Irwitt took this, another brilliant photographer. He's a street photographer, so I'm going to say that I don't think he posed this. He just came across this amazing shot where this young boy with his beautiful open expression, one of his eyes is just lined up with what appears to be a bullet hole or some other projectile that shattered the glass, and it just makes for a really, really powerful black and white file. Robert Frank, who was most well known for a book called The Americans. Robert Frank wants you to look at the people in this image. He wants you to look at the people that are perfectly framed by the window frames. He wants you to look at the diversity of their faces as well as the diversity of the people, which is what the book The Americans was all about. Totally superfluous as to what color that streetcar or bus is or was, because that's not where he wanted your attention to be drawn anyway. He wants you to be looking at the faces and the reflections in those windows above the faces. Chinese photographer who I discovered, Fan Ho, wonderful graphic black and white photographer, but also usually included some people in his images. So right away, he's got a great perch. He's looking down onto this ground where some building or bridge or gate is throwing this amazing shadow onto the ground. And I believe it was just patience on his part until he got to a point where there was someone in every one of those columns, not stepping on any of the lines, all going in their separate directions, leaving you to completely wonder what everyone is up to, you know, in this particular picture. And he's using this black and white format and a graphic context to really send that image home. Another fun part was finding a couple of photographers that I'd never heard of. This is by someone named Sharin Lim. Now, I know a lot of us have taken this picture at the Howard County Fair and at other carnivals and amusement parks that we've been to. But this one stood out to me, and it stood out to me because of the graphic use of black and white. The ride itself is just a totally black monolith on the right-hand side of the image. There are no details in the people at all. They're pure silhouettes, and all you can really see is the hair flying from some of the women who are on the ride. So again, I can't think of what movie it is, but there's a Hitchcock movie that ends in an amusement park, and you could break down the last 10 minutes of that movie into 1,000 or 2,000 still photographs, and every single one of them would be beautifully seen and beautifully realized as a beautiful black and white image. This is by someone by the name of Hdr Photography. A beautiful graphic image on its own, beautiful shadows, great lines, great patterns, but it's the placement of the person on that third stairway that just brings this into a totally different dimension. And again, it's the bringing in of the human emotion, of the vulnerability, of the wonder into photography, into black and white photography. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's required, because I'm going to show you some work that has no people or cats or any other animals in it. It's just something that I noticed as I studied black and white photography a little more. This is another topic that we all seem to love to shoot: abandoned things. Why? Well, because we think that there's some sort of story attached to anything that's abandoned. This particular is, I thought, was a really effective abandoned house image. The landscape around it is also completely abandoned. Sometimes we find an abandoned house, but there's too much stuff in the background. This one is set off completely by itself. And of course, you're left to wonder what we always wonder: who lived there? What happened to them? Under what circumstances did they leave? So the humans are no longer there, but in a way they are there. And that's what gives an image like this such strong emotional impact. A beautiful self-portrait by someone that I just know by the name of Elena Kay. You know, we're talking about black and white photography tonight. Don't be afraid of black and white, meaning using the purest values to bring your message home to the viewer. And here we have, this is a self-portrait of this woman, Elena, and half of her face is completely black. The other half is completely white, except for the details around her eye, of course, her eyelash, her eyebrow, and a little bit of her nose. But it just was one of the more striking self-portraits that I've ever come across in doing the research that I did to put this presentation together. I had mentioned elegance and sophistication before. I think black and white is far better at that than most color photography. This is by that gentleman, Hdr Photography again. And I believe what happened in this case is he found a beautiful backdrop, the rainy pavement, and purposely waited for something to occur. And this bike driver came through, and by using a slow shutter speed and probably panning at the same time, he was able to create this very, very strong, elegant, and sophisticated black and white image. Totally colored, totally unnecessary. So now let's talk a little bit more about what I'm driving at with emotions and colors. We bring, just as we said in the introduction, we bring all of who we are to all of our work. I believe it was Minor White that was quoted as saying, every image is a self-portrait. But we also are part of a bigger culture that has inculcated us with a whole variety of emotional and non-emotional relationships. And this chart really lays out in pretty pure form how we, at least in this culture, because I've been asked at some of these other presentations, do I think this chart would be the same in other countries, which I thought was a great question that I don't really have the answer to. But in Western values, I really resonated with this chart, because if you look at the emotions associated with these different colors, you bring that to your viewing of art, whether you really want to or not, and whether you're conscious of it or not. It really doesn't matter. And what I loved about this particular one, because I found a few different versions of this, was this one also includes the white, gray, and black, and the emotions associated with it. And as you can see, if you sort of combine some of the qualities of black, gray, and white into a thought pattern or into an image you're trying to create, you can see why black and white is such an effective medium. You can also see, though, why color, instead of it thinking of it as just removing a distraction, you're actually changing the emotive value of the image itself, because the colors that and the emotions that we associate with them, they may not be what you're trying to say with the image that you're trying to create. And then in those cases, color is actually interfering with what you're trying to transmit to the viewer. And the more I thought about this, and the more I looked at my color work, and I still do a tremendous amount of color work as well, this chart just really resonated with me and made a lot of sense. All right, so now we're going to look at some images of mine after I take a sip of coffee. And we're going to look at the color version and then the monochrome, or the black and white version. So let's go back to that emotional content part again. You know, when you're out in the field and you're not sure what subject matter you're looking to capture, you're just out on what we call like a ramble. You're just sort of looking around and just seeing what happens. When you make that emotional connection with certain types of subject matter, that's a very, very fortunate occurrence, because it doesn't happen really often. And I think if we all think about how often we felt really strongly, emotively about some of the work that we're creating, it happens a lot of the times unconsciously, but being aware of it consciously is really a different process. But there's another way to look at that. The other way to look at this is there are places you can go. This is the Penn Station, you know, the Amtrak station in Baltimore. There are places that you can go where you are more likely to find imagery that is going to be more emotional just by its very nature. So I find places like transit stations, so train stations, airports, bus stations, places where people are congregating and picking a direction to go, that you're more likely to run into an emotional situation. You know, at a train station, you have people reuniting for the first time in maybe 10 years, or potentially parting ways after, you know, and not knowing how long it's going to be until they see each other. So pre-COVID, I'd make a point of stopping off at Penn Station about 2 or 3 times a year and basically just perching on one of the benches and just watching life unfold and seeing if I could find some of those emotional moments. And so one day I walk in and there's this young boy just leaning up against his suitcase. And I immediately get that feeling, a little bit of loneliness and abandonment, although he's got a suitcase, so he's probably on his way somewhere. But the overall color file just wasn't working for me. There were way too many other emotions being brought in by the colors. And yes, they were certainly distracting. And so by converting it to monochrome, I'm now able to draw your eye far more onto the young boy leaning up against his suitcase. The window light is still gorgeous. I wanted to leave the doors in because they represent his potential escape. He's probably waiting for a train, I'm assuming, since he's got a suitcase. And so by converting it to black and white, it really drove that theme home for me in a much more effective way. I'm at the Peabody Library one day, you know, shooting that beautiful spiral staircase, but I was hoping against hope that as I was framing up my shot, that someone would actually come walking down the stairs. And there is an elevator, so you don't have to use the stairs. But as I was putting the shot together, sure enough, I heard footsteps from that third landing up above. And then I just kept hoping that whoever this was coming down, that they'd be close enough to the railing and maybe even peer over a little bit so that I can include that person in this graphic context. And sure enough, I got lucky. And this young woman came down the stairs. And my first impression of this was that she was sort of caught in like a vortex or a maelstrom. I think I called this in the vortex when I put it into a competition. But again, that green color was way too heavy and way too um, beyond distracting. It was just throwing a value into the image, which I just wasn't really looking for. I really want you to see her as someone that's potentially caught in this maelstrom and in this confusion. And I just found that, you know, a monochrome or black and white just worked so much better to accomplish that goal. Here I am at the Amtrak station again. Immediately drawn to this man laying on the bench, taking a nap. He's got a bottle in his hand. I loved all of the compositional elements, the sconces on the wall, the telephone Amtrak police sign, the offices in the back, but the colors just were way getting in the way of what I was trying to translate to the viewer. And by basically converting it to a black and white, I keep all those important compositional elements in, but I take out all those inflections and all those other feelings that those colors may have portrayed. And now I want you to just look at the gentleman and his reflection in the bench. And you're again left to wonder, is this a homeless person that's come in to use the facilities? Maybe this is an employee for one of the cleaning companies. You really don't know, but I definitely wanted your eye drawn just to the gentleman on the bench. Sometimes you can definitely express joy in black and white photography. And there's another nice part about it, which is that it can be very effective for abstract photography. So here I am at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and I turn to my left and I find these two water fountains. But to me, they don't look at all like water fountains. To me, there's some sort of figures with skirts on them, and there's some sort of force field emanating from their basin. So I immediately took this into the abstract world as I was looking at it. And then when I got home from the trip and began working on the image, and every once in a while this hangs up. When I converted it to black and white, it drove that message so much home for me. It's a much stronger abstract image now as a black and white. I darkened down what I call the skirts that the water fountains are wearing, and I brightened up the force field that's emanating from the basins. So again, black and white does lend itself, and I have some other abstracts a little further into the program. It does lend itself to abstract photography. And again, that is because you are working with the shapes and the textures and the patterns. So it really lends itself well to abstracts. We're always trying to recreate the feeling of awe. And awe is a feeling. It's an emotion. It's the emotion that we feel when we're out in nature for the most part, and we're experiencing something that's just making us feel incredible, and it makes us feel alive. And in this case, I'm just up in Southern York County with a big thunderstorm brewing up. And I realized after working on this image as a color file for a while and doing some color, some changes to the color of the landscape below, that's not really what the image is about at all. The image is purely about the cloud and the force of the thunderstorm that was developing. And so once I removed that yellow and green from the foreground, it really it draws your eye much more into what I want you to feel, which is the power of a thunderstorm as you're literally waiting for it to come to you, which is what in this case it did. This is in the Hudson River Valley. I'm happy to say that after, and it really is through my exposure with the Baltimore Camera Club and some of the fine black and white shooters that we have, that I am beginning now to think in black and white at times, not all the time, but at times. And when I looked at this image through my viewfinder, I just knew that this was going to lend itself to a much better black and white file than a color file. I had this, that house is far from abandoned. It's a beautiful estate, but I have it sitting in a really nice position by itself with the power lines off to the left to give it some scale and a stormy sky, but it wasn't translating that feeling of aloneness or potential abandonment. And by converting it to black and white and working on the file, it just was so much more relevant to my own emotional experience when I looked through the viewfinder, because now I've darkened down all the foliage. I've made the sky a bit more stormy. I brightened up the house a little bit, and your eye is now drawn right to that house. But I really wanted to keep those power lines visible off to the left, so they were kept a little brighter, and it just made for a much, much stronger black and white file. Some of you are familiar with my Hamden girl. This is a young girl that I took a shot of several years ago. I don't have time to tell you the whole story as to how this image developed. Many of you have heard it anyway, but as soon as I saw this file on my computer, I saw the possibility of making this timeless. And by that, I mean making it so it's almost impossible to know at what decade or what era this image was taken. It was the combination of her dress, her face, her hair, and even some of the clutter that's on her porch behind her. And again, I knew I had everything going for me. And by converting it to black and white, I've now created what I think is a more timeless image. Now it's even harder to kind of figure when exactly this was taken. I mean, because that dress right away reminded me of definitely like 1930s or 1940s Appalachia. And what the black and white version also really highlighted were those stone black and white raccoons that are sitting on the patio, which to me is another real integral part of this image. Similar with us going up to the mud sales and capturing Amish portraits. A great portrait is purely based on what I started out this presentation with. It's the connection. If you make a connection with the person you're taking a portrait of, and I mean an eye-to-eye connection, the viewer is going to feel that right through the 2D medium, whether it's on the screen or whether it's printed. But in this case, I knew I had that going for me, but I had that straw yellow hat sort of working against what I was trying to accomplish. I already had, they dress very simply. So he was already wearing a very simple coat that's, could again be dated to the 30s or the 40s. I had that lock-on connection with the person, but I really needed to convert it to a monochrome to make it much more of a timeless image. And again, that's one of those unique qualities of black and white, is this feeling of timelessness, of not being able to pin down exactly when the image was created. Black and white also works really well with anything weather related, right? Snow, mist, fog, rain, and night, because I consider night to be a weather phenomenon. I'm from New York City, so I have a very strong emotional connection to New York City. My wife and I are both Art Deco fans. And so, of course, our favorite building is the Chrysler Building, which is an Art Deco masterpiece. And we were able to get up on a rooftop bar one winter's night. And again, I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but it was really quite a lot of work to get this particular image because there was a large security fence in the way. But I was able to manage to do that. And I was able to frame the Chrysler Building with these two giant office towers. The one on the left is complete. The one on the right is still under construction. But again, as I looked at it, the colors were very varied and very emotionally sort of bizarre. And I really wanted the focus to purely be on the Chrysler Building. And by just converting it to a really strong monochrome, although your eye is definitely drawn to the other aspects of what's going on in the office buildings, it's the Chrysler building that you absolutely look at first. And you move from the Chrysler building then to the two giants that are framing it. So again, nighttime works really well with black and white photography. So here I am at Baltimore Cemetery, and we have green grass at a cemetery. Now, right away, that's an interesting contrast because we do associate green with nurture and nature and with life, and yet we're at a cemetery. So that, you know, as a color file, I kind of liked it because it had that sort of contrast going for it. But I remember the day that I went, I was really more in a slightly darker space, and I wanted to more bring home the age of the cemetery and the shape that some of the stones were in. And I wanted to use that beautiful tree behind as a framing element. And so by removing that green, which is really all I did in terms of changing this to a black and white, it just in a split second, it just changes the overall emotional impact of the image to one of more sadness and despair. Whereas the color, because of our association with green, it kind of has a little bit of a different emotional flavor to it. So as I said, I also did some work with macros. You know, when COVID hit, I knew that macro would still be one thing that I could always do, right? I could always go to Trader Joe's or to Fresh Market and buy some flowers and set up something in my house and still work on photography. And so one of the first group of flowers that I bought were calla lilies, because calla lilies to me are the most elegant and most sophisticated of all the flowers that I've ever shot. And this is when I can say to you that as I started working on this project, I was already thinking in black and white because I wanted these to be elegant and I wanted these to be sophisticated. And that calls out for black and white. And so it went from that to that. And I think now it sends that message of elegance and sophistication much more readily to the viewer than the green version, which kind of goes into a greeny yellow kind of tonality. So I worked on a few, and some I was trying to get as sharp as possible. I was just learning focus stacking when I was working on this project. But then I also started thinking about, you know, that water fountain picture that I showed you, and that this would lend itself very well to abstract photography as well. And so after I completed the first part of the project, I then went into the world of the abstract, and I started playing with different focus settings, different apertures, different placements, different backgrounds. I removed the jet black background and went to more of a gray sort of noiry background, which I thought lent itself really well to these abstracts. And here's another example of just catching some of the veins in one of the calla lilies and purposely leaving that outer edge, you know, abstract and blurred. So it really works well with abstract photography. So now I'm just going to show a few images that are just the black and whites only, and then I'm going to take my first pause. I'm going to pause a couple of times, and Sandy's keeping track, or someone's keeping track if anyone has any questions or comments. So sometimes, and you know, you've heard this from so many people, patience is required. This image came to be because I found the backdrop. This is on the east side of Manhattan. I found that pathway with the beautiful fences, the light posts, those scary looking trees coming in from the left. I had a deserted power plant, a deserted Con Edison power plant sitting on that island behind this walkway, but I absolutely needed a person. I had the graphic context, but I needed the human element to be part of this. And I knew, even though I'm sort of in an obscure the east part of town, I knew within 10 or 15 minutes that someone would come up those stairs to the left. And sure enough, you know, after about 10 or 12 very cold minutes, because it was February and it was chilly, a gentleman came up from those stairs and walked toward me. And I was lucky in that he was wearing all dark clothing as well. And to me, that's what this image needed. It needed that person to add to the overall emotional impact of the image. here I am at the Amtrak station again, but on this day, I'm just concentrating on silhouettes. So I'm sitting on a bench across from that door that you can see in the background. That's where that beautiful column of light is coming through. And I just waited for action to happen. And obviously it's a train station. People are always, moving to and fro. But in this particular case, I caught this very elegantly dressed woman wearing these nice pair of boots and pulling a suitcase. And I caught that right moment in time when she's lifting her foot up and got it right in the column of light. And it really, the dark nature of the image, the black and white quality, it really lends that feeling of a little bit of sadness, a little loneliness, and certainly a different feeling than if it was a very bright, exposure. Snow, which we are lucky and we're getting this year, is a wonderful time to go out and take black and white images. As I said, not every good or high quality emotional black and white image has to have living things in it. This is just a simple image of snow, of fences in the snow. I will say that another benefit of going back to the same place on many occasions to take pictures, to capture images, is that you actually start developing a relationship with the locale. You get to know it. You get to know where it is. So it's easy to find. You're not wasting a lot of time wandering, looking for something that may not happen. So, I used to live in Southern York County, Pennsylvania. I know where a lot of the farms and barns and horse farms are. And so when it snows, I'm immediately drawn back to that area. Here's a similar kind of shot, except in this case, I was able to move far enough back from the tree line to capture that beautiful curving fence running through the field in front of the tree line. And this one I just took the other day, and this is on the other side of where those other fences are. It's actually a ranch, and they have horses. And on this particular day, I just decided to concentrate more on the fences, but with the horses in the image. And I think that this one has a really nice splay of the horses throughout the image. They're nicely in silhouette. You don't really see too much detail of any one horse. But I do feel it's that one horse on the left with his head down that really kind of adds the overall rhythm of the image. So talk about going to the same locale over and over again. I've been shooting this same tree for probably about 10 or 11 years. And I try and visit this tree all 4 seasons, although it's not as interesting in the summer. It's more interesting in the fall and the winter and early spring. But this tree has become a friend of mine. I have a personal relationship with this tree. I have an emotional connection through my imagery with this tree. And on this particular day, a little bit of snow, very stormy sky, definitely some work in the digital darkroom, but it's just, again, it's part of well, the term we like to use is body of work. So I could say that this is part of an overall much larger body of work that I have created over all those years of just my relationship with this tree. And one of these days, I know I'm going to go back and it won't be there. It'll fall down. A storm will take it down. Maybe some developer will buy the land and knock it down. You just never know. Obviously, black and white works very well with monochromatic subjects. So this is just an off-white barn door, barn side. I knew right away this was going to be a monochrome file. There basically is no color in it, but I love the dark shadows or the dark points that the studs create when the barn was actually constructed, and the darker frame around the door. And in this case, the door is latched, which is kind of interesting because in this case, the door is unlatched. And this is another barn I came across, and the barn is muddy brown in color, which was very unattractive as a color. And it also sent sort of a, I don't know, sort of an oddly confusing emotional message to me. And again, by having a connection to this area that I used to live in, the same way that I now have a connection with Baltimore as a city, those are the connections that potentially can raise the quality of your photography to a higher level. And really all I mean by that is that it's going to get some type of reaction from the viewer that's looking at your work, because I think in the end that's really one of our goals. Another recent shot, one of the snowstorm we had in December was actually a snowstorm in Baltimore, but a little north of here it was a snow and an ice storm. And again, this is a route that I'm familiar with. So this is off of 83, probably in the Parkton Hereford area. The trees in the background are all completely covered in ice. And I'm just using the leading lines of the cornfield of the fallow corn to lead you right into the farm scene. And if you notice, there's a great symmetry in the windows and the doors of the buildings. And what seems to be a smokestack, because there's some snow being blown off the top of it, it actually is just a grain silo, but it just gives you that impression that it's a smokestack, because it looks like there's smoke, coming out of it. This was just done the other day. This is again Southern York County. This is about a half a mile from where I used to live, my old farmhouse. I'm very familiar with the landscape of that area. I knew that if I just composed this correctly, that I could put together a really beautiful Southern York County snow winter landscape. And then, of course, with a little work in the digital darkroom, this is what the end product was. All right, so this is where we're going to take our first little stops, Sandy. So, or Jim, if anyone has.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready with some questions. Okay, the first one is from Kenny, and he was asking about shooting in a train station with cameras, and he's wondering if there are security issues about using your camera inside a train station, or if you're using your iPhone.
No, I'm not using my iPhone. I don't believe that there's any law against you taking images in a place like an Amtrak station, although I have been occasionally accosted and asked what I was doing. And once I explained that I was just an amateur photographer and I happen to like trains and train stations, they basically said, fine. I think the best answer to that question is that each of us as a photographer has to draw that line as to whether we feel comfortable shooting in circumstances or whether we just don't feel comfortable enough to shoot in circumstances. It goes also to whether you feel comfortable, to be quite candid, trespassing. Many of you in the audience know that I, as well as some of my friends, we have trespassed. We have sometimes gotten caught for trespassing, but there was something that drew us so strongly to whatever the subject matter is that we just said, screw it, we'll take a chance. So, but I've never, other than being accosted and asked about, was I there for like a model shoot or something like that, I've never encountered any other difficulties there.
Good.
Part of it is just blending in. All I do is sit on a bench and I have a small, my Olympus mirrorless camera is pretty small. You can kind of just blend in with the surroundings. Yeah.
And Steve Dembo has reminded us that it's not illegal if it's a public place.
Right. Right. You can get hassled at the airport too, though. So, you have to, as a photographer in certain places, you just have to be aware, and you have to then be thinking, well, how am I going to react if? You should have your reaction sort of pre-planned if something does occur.
Yeah. And Dennis has said he was shooting in a local mall and was told by a security guard that I couldn't photograph. No explanation provided.
Yeah, well, see, a local mall
is private.
Yeah, that could be considered private, right? Exactly. So right there, and again, we've had people give seminars to the club about this, and I think there's a lot of, not to use a very bad pun, there's a lot of gray area in the law surrounding this whole thing about photography. So, and I'm not an expert at it, so I'm not going to pontificate any further.
Okay, so Diane has asked, any advice for developing our own black and white body of work? Do you take the images in with black and white in mind? Or do you just convert to black and white as an option in post-processing to see if it's, create more of the emotional?
Well, as I said, there are times when I'm even composing the image in the viewfinder, I am thinking black and white. And let's just use this was the one that's up on the screen as an example. There wasn't a tremendous amount of color in this scene to begin with. There's some color in the shrubbery. There's some color in the corn stalks. The house has a reddish color. But to me, the way this landscape was laying out in front of me, I kind of felt that this was going to convey much better in black and white and color. So there's no real answer to that question. When I'm shooting, and I used to have color images included in this presentation just to show people that I am still very much a color photographer. When I'm shooting the Caribbean Parade, or when I'm at the Latino Festival, or when I'm at Artscape, or when I'm at any number of other events in Baltimore, I'm shooting, well, I shoot color all the time anyway, which we're going to talk about in a minute or two, but I'm not even thinking black and white, because the colors that my sensor and my eyes are picking up are so wonderful. The Caribbean Parade, I don't think we'll have it this year, but hopefully next July we will, is one of the most colorful and wonderful events. We have the best ethnic festivals in this city, bar none, compared to other cities, in the mid-Atlantic. And so all those are opportunities to really expand my color work. My black and white work starts out basically with me thinking quickly about whether this might lend itself to black and white. So I'm already thinking about what I may do to it. But in the end, it really does need to be converted from the color file to the black and white file before you can make like a final decision on which direction you want to go in. And to me, that direction is purely dependent on what emotion I want people to feel. In this case, I want you to feel the chilliness, the coldness of the snow, the barren trees, the fact that there's no leaves on the trees, the house off to the right. It just conveys so much better in black and white, especially with that nice black and white, stormy sky.
Good. And one last question from Angel. So when you are shooting the images that are, you actually said portraits of the children,
right?
You get permission to take those shots?
No, I do not. I'm not a good permission asking person, because I think the minute you do that, and again, this is that same line that every one of us has to draw. The minute you do that, you've changed the emotion of the moment to something completely different. I basically am doing a lot of my candid portraits with longer lenses. The Hamden Girl's an example. That's a much longer story. But when I'm at like one of the mud sales and looking to take some really interesting Amish portraits, I'm kind of stalking. I just sort of look at the crowd and I find an interesting face, whether it be an adult or a child, and I then sort of follow that person for a brief amount of time to see if I can get that person in a really interesting, candid moment. And if you really get lucky, at the moment that everything comes together, that person looks right at you and locks eyes. And that's when you get those portraits that are just so mind-blowingly timeless. But asking permission, I'm not saying that's wrong or right, but it's definitely going to change the emotion of that moment in a very large way. It has to be candid for it to be what I'm trying to do.
Okay, good. Well, that's it. I can see in our chat room that we're discussing, the privacy issue and
right.
permission. And so a lot of people are engaged in that. So that's good. Yep. So why don't you continue? And everybody else, at the end, we're going to have some time for.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So what we're going to jump into now is some post-processing. And I want to make some comments right off the top about post-processing. in relation to me and post-processing in relation to this presentation. Post-processing to me is a situation where I already have a goal in mind. So what I mean by that is I'm looking at an image, I'm already creating in my mind an idea of where I want to take that image. Do I want to darken the background? Do I want to lighten the foreground? What do I think it needs to really bring it home, so to speak? And then the post-processing becomes a means to an end. You know, there's nothing wrong with taking an image that you think may be good, but you're not quite sure. You know, you're thinking, well, maybe this image has got good bones. I like to use that expression. It's got, you know, it's a good composition. It's got the elements that make a good picture. And you just take it into the software program of your choice and you just start moving sliders around willy-nilly, and you're trying to squeeze something out of the image through the post-processing process. I'm going to stipulate that that works for me about 2% of the time, meaning that in the end, I just end up going back to my original thought, which was, you know what, I don't think this image is really worth working on, and I move on. Whereas when I find an image that really strikes me and I have a goal in mind with where I want to take that image, then the post-processing becomes much easier for number one. And number two, it becomes much more goal-oriented. And when you reach that goal, it becomes a much more satisfying process. I love working on images, but I don't like working on them without a game plan, sort of like without an idea of where I'm going. So that's my first comment about post-processing. My second comment is, in terms of this presentation, this is obviously not a presentation about how you can best convert images in Nik or in Lightroom to monochrome. That would be, I teach a course just on that, which is 4 2.5-hour sessions. So I don't want you to think that what I'm going to show you in some of my examples are like, you know, the best way or the only way. They're just examples that I've chosen for the case of this presentation, so that I can quickly show you what my roadmap is in certain cases. So I just wanted to make that clear, because, you know, I don't purport to be a software expert. There are many people in this audience that know far more about a variety of software programs than I know, and I have no problem admitting that. All right, so we have the Ansel Adams scale. There actually was someone else associated whose name gets left off, which I think is kind of unfair. And we're all kind of used to seeing this, you know, the zone system 0 through 10. I like this one because it actually lists the subject matter that falls into the different zones, which I think is kind of handy. That gives you a really good idea. But actually, why I wanted you to look at this chart is because I really wanted you to then quickly, while you still have this chart in mind, look at this one. And what this one is doing is it's converting color into its natural tonality. Now, for the sake of this presentation, tonality, brightness, and luminosity all mean the same thing. It's basically the amount of light being reflected off of the grayscale tones. And what's so interesting is to notice how different colors actually work in association and in conjunction with their tonal values as expressed in grayscale. So in this case, you can quickly see that the bright violet on the right-hand side is the lightest in luminosity, and the blue right next to it is actually the darkest, and all the others sort of fall into the different zones. So the reason why I show this is because sometimes you have an image in front of you, like this one, that's very colorful. And, you know, we have these beautiful row homes in Baltimore, and they're, you know, I love the way that blocks get together and decide how they're going to paint them. And, you know, this kind of image, you could be led to quickly think this is going to be a really cool black and white. But in reality, if I do is just convert it really quickly into black and white, it actually is remarkably flat. And it's remarkably flat because the tonality of those colors are actually very close to one another if you were to compare them on that scale that I showed you. And yes, you can punch up any color within this context. You could make this image more contrasty. But my point is just to show that a naturally colorful image does not necessarily lend itself, even just technically, to a really good black and white image. Here's another example. These are just some petunias in a vase on my patio. This one even fooled me because as I was playing around with shooting this, I was already thinking, boy, this would, this might look really cool in black and white. I've got those yellows and the pinks and the green of the foliage. But sure enough, here's another example. This one's even flatter. There's almost no tonality difference between the colors that are making up this color file. So it's just something to keep in mind. It is very important to always shoot in color because you want to retain all the color data and then do your conversion in a software program to monochrome or black and white. You never, ever should shoot in black and white, in my opinion, because you're just losing so much data and you're using the camera's algorithm to create the black and white. And the algorithms in these different software programs are so much more powerful than what's in your camera. So I know some people like to shoot a JPEG in black and white to sort of give them an idea of what the image might look like as a black and white. Personally, I'd rather shoot more than one image at different exposure values and then take a look at them later and decide maybe there's one out of the 2 or 3 that I shot that actually lends itself more to a monochrome than another. All right, so let's start quickly with this one. Here's another Amish girl from one of the mud sales. She already has that amazingly timeless quality. I remember when I first showed this image that people, without telling where I got it, people thought she was a Russian emigre. Some people thought she was from like Central America. But to me, I knew she was an Amish young girl. I knew where I had captured the picture. It had that timeless quality about it, except for the pink scarf, which just threw me. And I think it threw me emotionally because of what we associate with the color pink and the fact that it may not work really well with what I'm trying to say. And by very quickly just doing a quick black and white conversion, I knew right away that I was on the right path because that enabled me to just eliminate the pink from the color. And I then did some other work on the image, which I'm just going to try. When I do these things, I'm going to try and do them quickly because when I work on an image seriously, it may take me, a half hour to 45 minutes per image. But I basically ended up putting a radial filter over her face and I brought out some of the highlights and she had a lot of shadows. So I brought out those values. I added a bit of clarity. I took dehaze down a little bit. I basically wanted to highlight more of her face, which I used the radial filter for that. And I actually wanted to make the scarf even a little brighter. And when you're in Lightroom and you have your access to all the color channels down here, there's one very handy tool right here, which is the specific color. And you just click on that. And by then clicking on the image where you want to affect the tonality, you just click and you either drag down to darken or you drag up to lighten. And in this particular case, you can see that only the magenta slider is moving, but in some cases, more than one slider might move because there are colors that are made up of many colors. And so for the sake of tonight's presentation, that's where I'm just going to leave off with this one. But I took it from there to here. And I think now it has much more of that timeless quality that I was sort of looking for in this particular image. Black and white can also be used to create something that's uniquely your own. I know myself, and I know probably all of you out in the audience have seen an image like this hundreds of thousands of times because we are blessed with these beautiful sunflower fields all around Baltimore, and we're very attracted to them because they're gorgeous. There's no other reason. They're beautiful. They're happy places. They're good places to be. But I've seen this image so many times that one day when I was looking at my sunflower images, I said, you know, I've never tried to see what a monochrome would do with an image that's so intrinsically colorful. And so again, I basically, for this one, I'm just going to start the process by just changing it to monochrome, by clicking on black and white. And I know I still have all of the color channels open to me. So I can make the blue sky lighter or darker by just moving the blue slider. I can make the actual sunflowers have much more of a glow by just impacting the yellows and the oranges. I can affect the foliage down here with the greens. And so basically what this enabled me to do is to create sort of a unique sunflower image that I had just never seen before, because I had never seen one in black and white. And then what I also did was I put a radial filter in the middle right there. And there's the area that I was masking. And I basically wanted to bring out more of that interesting texture and clarity that was in the middle of that sunflower. I didn't like it being in such shadow. And for the sake of tonight's purpose, that's where I'm just going to stop. So we went from what's intrinsically a color file, an image that we've all seen hundreds and hundreds of times, to an image that just feels, to me, quite different. It just has a different feel to it. And that can be used to your advantage to create your own unique visions of things that are photographed all the time. So it's just also something else to keep in mind with black and white. What I've also been playing with lately is scanning some slides, because I wanted to see, well, I really wanted to see what kind of work I was doing when I was doing a little more traveling and when I was still shooting color slides, and what I potentially could do impact wise with converting them to monochrome and how they would convert to monochrome. So this was a little Cataract Falls. I don't really remember where I was when I took this, but in this particular case, I'm going to convert it to black and white, but I'm also going to open up the presets in Lightroom. Lightroom has a variety of black and white presets. And what I'm looking for, my goalpost, or what I'm already wanting to do, is I want to darken down as much of that background as I can. And I want the falls to really stand out more from the background. So you basically just sort of run through the presets. And these again are just starting points. I kind of like that because the foliage is still pretty visible. Let's just pick this one for the sake of tonight. Black and white number 5. And then you just hit close. And now you can make any other adjustments to the file that you want to. So in this case, although I'm really kind of liking the way it's looking right now, I'm going to open up my adjustment brush. And I'm going to double click effect, which will zero out anything that was in the tool before. And I'm going to bring my exposure down. And if you want to see where you're painting, you can put the mask on, which is this little button down here. But I'm comfortable enough these days where I don't have to put the mask on. And I'm basically just going to start painting some darker exposures into certain parts of this image. There we go. So again, some pretty simple strokes of the keys, took an image from there to there. And it's just far more dramatic and much more to my liking as an image than the color version. So that was an easy one. This is another one of my images that people have seen. This was a slide. This was taken probably in the late 90s. And I always thought, but I never had the opportunity because I hadn't scanned the slide. I always thought that this would really lend itself to a great black and white. It had so many qualities going for it that could potentially make it a strong black and white image. This time I'm going to take it into Nik Silver Efex Pro. So I'm going to right click on the image, edit in Silver FX Pro 2. Now, Silver FX Pro, the more I learn about it, can easily predict that within the next maybe 6 months, as I learn more and more about all of its capabilities, it probably will become my black and white conversion program of choice. It is a lot more powerful than Lightroom. It just has so many more tools to use. And what's also nice is that the interface between Lightroom and Silver FX Pro is now a piece of cake. So it really lends itself to, exporting out of Lightroom, doing some work on the image, and then importing it right back and continuing to do whatever work you might want to do in Lightroom. So my goal in this case was to darken down this background, to make these trees be much more highlighted, to bring out a little more detail in this really interesting foreground. So again, Silver FX Pro has 58 presets, and they're all devoted to black and white photography. So right away, that gives you a tremendous bigger choice of starting points. But there are some that I start gravitating to. I like looking first at the high structure ones, because it really puts a lot of nice texture and sharpening on the file. But I like the high structure, this one a little better, because that one, the background was a little too bright for me. This one, the background's a little nicely dark. But you have all of these different presets that you can play with. So these are all different algorithmic things that the company that now owns Nik have built into the program. So let's just stick with that preset for the moment, the one that I picked. And you can then make a whole variety of other adjustments to your file. Structure basically is sort of the strength of that particular algorithm. So you can take it down or move it up. You can adjust the contrast, the brightness. You have what's called tonality protections, meaning that if my highlights are being protected from any other changes that I make. And of course, the other beauty with Nik's Silver FX Pro are what are called the control points. And you basically open up a control point by just clicking on it. I'm going to place a control point on that particular tonality right there. The minute you click, it opens up a tool. The tool is made up of, the first tool is a slider, which basically controls the size of the area. So I'm just going to keep it at that for the moment. BR is for brightness. I can either make that area brighter or I could make it darker. In this case, I wanted to make it slightly brighter. Then you can adjust contrast within the range of the mask. So it's a very, very powerful tool. Here's structure again. AW is amplify whites. In this particular case, I'm actually going to take the whites down a little bit. Amplify blacks. I'm going to say yes, I want to amplify the blacks a little bit. And then there's fine structure and selective color. And then when you're done, you just click on the control point again. If you wanted to see the area that was masked, you just click on that little box right over here, and you can see the area that the masking was applied to. What's also really cool is it gives you the whole choice of color filters, like we used to do in the film days. So my gut feeling tells me that if I put a red filter on this, the sky is going to get a little darker, because that's what we used to use, red filters to darken blue skies. However, in this case, I think it actually made it a little too dark. So I'm going to stick to the neutral version because I kind of like the way that's looking right there. If you like emulating film types, you have tons of choices. That's a whole other drop-down menu that you can play with. You also have access to all the color channels still. You have a level and curves adjustment. You can add toning if people are into sepia or chromium or any one of these. You can just scroll over them and you can see the effect that it applies to the image. And in this case, I want it back to back to neutral. So you have a tremendous amount of power over the conversion. And I'm just going to, for this sake of right now, I'm just going to click save. And it's just going to import it right back into Lightroom. And now you can still work on anything else that you might want to work on, except for the color channels. You don't have any access to the color channels anymore because you've imported this now as a monochrome file. But let's say I wanted to brighten up just where some of those little shadows are on some of those aspen trees. You know, I could open up my adjustment brush, double click effect to get it zeroed out, and just add a tiny bit of exposure and basically just brush on a little bit of exposure to make these trees really sing. Right, like there. And if I wanted to extend it out, I could make it, you know, as much as you want. Whoops, that bled over a little bit. So the nice thing is, by being able to move back and forth like that so quickly and effortlessly between the two programs, it really lends itself, I think, to be a very, very, it's definitely going to be my favorite tool as soon as I get better at it, to be quite candid. All right, so here we have the old featureless sky dilemma, and I know we are in an area of AI where I know quite a few people in the audience are going to be thinking, wow, that's a pretty cool image. You can just swap in a different sky. For whatever reason, and I really can't give you a solid reason, I'm just not there yet, either technically or even wanting to do that. There's still so much I need to learn about photography that I don't want to start, you know, playing with nature, I guess is one way I'd say it. So I always want to explore what I potentially can do. And I know that with a featureless blue sky, there's actually quite a bit I can do to make this image a lot more dramatic looking, right? By making the sky very, very dark. But what I first want to do on this image is take out this little, it's either a rock or it's a stump coming out, but whatever it is, it interferes with my sensibility. So I just took my cloning tool. I don't like where it's sampled from, so I just move it to be where I want it to sample from, which is just the similar kind of landscape. Let's say for tonight's purposes, right about there. You can certainly get much more exact than that. Oh, I left a little piece in there. All right, let's just leave it there. I just want to get rid of that. Okay. So I know that I have control over the color channels if I convert it to a black and white file. So I convert to a black and white file. I know that there may also be some presets down here that may help me accomplish my goal. So I open up the black and white presets, and I'm looking for one where the sky automatically turns a lot darker and helps me accomplish my goal. So black and white number 7 sort of does a pretty decent job. So I'm going to use that as a preset, and then I'm going to close it. And then since I still have control over the color channels, I'm going to move down and I'm going to take my blue channel and I'm going to knock it all the way to the left. And now I'm simulating like a nighttime sky. And now I know I need to bring out more value in that area of the butte. So I open up my radial filter, double click effect, and I put a radial filter. You can move them, you can twist them. One of the things I like about radial filters versus control points is that you can change the shape. And I'm going to put a radial filter right in this area for tonight's presentation purposes. And what I want to do in that is bring out all that nice, there's really some nice shadow value in that part. So I want to give it a bit of a glow. And so right there, I've sort of accomplished that. I certainly still need to bring out some more detail in that area underneath. So I could go to my adjustment brush, double click effect, increase exposure a little, increase highlights, increase shadow values, increase whites, and I could basically just paint this area. And actually I can do that a little more than I did because I think it can take it. So I'll just use exposure for tonight's purpose. So right about there. Then the last thing I want to do with this is on the what's on the foreground, which is that I want to bring out the textures and the leading lines and also bring out some more detail in the shadow value. So in this case, I'll use the graduated neutral density filter, double click effect to make sure it zeroes out, put my filter right about there, drag it down over the bottom, make sure I'm masked properly. Nope, see that? I'm masked, it's upside down. So what I need to do is literally just turn that around. There we go. That's where I want the mask to be applied. So I'll turn that off. And now what I'll do is what I said. I'll bring up the textures. I'll bring out the shadow values. Add some clarity, dehaze it a little bit, which tends to make things slightly brighter. And there. And so for tonight's purpose, I'm done. I went from, well, I'd have to move back one, I guess. Yeah, no, well, maybe not. Okay. So I went from what was really a blah file to something that's very sort of dramatic looking. And again, it needs, you know, this was an image that I probably spent an hour on before I actually sent it to the printer. Let's go back to that emotional conversation again. As many of you know, I went through a difficult health crisis in 2019, and then sort of a long recuperation process. And knock on wood, thank you very much to the Johns Hopkins docs, because I'm now fine. But during that period of time, and right after that period of time, I was somehow being attracted to subject matter that was not usually attractive to me. So in this case, I came across this dying sunflower field. It really was, to be honest, kind of ugly for the most part, but something about the fading and the dying of the sunflowers and the other plants that were in that area really spoke to me. And again, it was maybe that, you know, that body of work concept that I thought about. So in this one, I sort of had a roadmap. I'm going to quickly take this one also into Silver Effects Pro, but this one is really quick because I know I'm getting long on time here. Yep. And my roadmap in this case was simple again. I wanted to darken down as much as possible and have the focus of the image be on the actual flower part of this, you know, fading sunflower. And so right away in the presets, I saw two that just popped right out, number 3 and number 4, both called high contrast. Let's just pick number 3 for tonight's purposes. And that accomplished a tremendous amount of my goal right there. I wanted this to be the focus. And I liked some of the details in the leaves above, but I didn't like much of the details in the leaves below. And so again, for tonight's purposes, I'm just going to, instead of working on it more with the Nick, I'm going to just bring it back into light. Oh, by the way, another interesting thing about Nick is here is the Ansel Adams zone system. Here's, as you scroll mouse over each one of these zones, a little grid appears on your image that'll show you what subject is falling into what zone. So that's kind of another handy little tool that they give you, I guess would be the right word. Hit save. All right, so now I still have the ability to work on it within Lightroom. I didn't like that hole in the leaf. So I basically just cloned it out. It just has to sample from the leaf above it. So that was one little thing I wanted to do. I wanted to darken down the top of the flower. Again, I opened up my trusty adjustment brush, double click effect, bring exposure down, and just start painting in a darker exposure. I also wanted to actually darken these leaves down even further. So I basically just painted. And there you go. So that's where I sort of ended up with this one. But I have a few others to show you that came out of that same time period of my life. Here's a zinnia flower that's in the stages of death and decay. Here's a little fern growing from my garden floor, but I purposely darkened out and made the background far more mysterious looking. And here's two little cornflowers where I really painstakingly darkened down the background. As I said, each one of these images could easily take you, you know, a half hour to an hour to work on to get them just the way you want them. So it was a member of the club and a very good friend of mine that looked at some of these images once and said, you know, Louis, these are very, very dark for you. These are not like your normal images that I'm used to seeing. I wonder if what you went through and what you're going through with your illness is having some impact on your photography. And it was another one of those wonderful moments that drove home how important that emotional connection is to your work and to your photography, because he was absolutely right. I wasn't aware of it, but he was right. We're going to skip the Amish tonight. All right, let's briefly talk about HDR photography, high dynamic range. With many black, yes.
You're aware that it is 9:35?
Oh, okay. I'm going to buzz through the rest of it then.
Okay.
HDR is good for black and white because you can stretch out the tonal values. So that was the right exposure. This is underexposed. That's overexposed. This is the file merged. Doesn't look great as a color file because it's too over the top, but it looks great as a black and white file, which is like that, which is really the look that I was sort of going for, that dramatic look. All right, well, Sandy, what I was about to do now, but we can skip it or do something else. This was the portion where I was going to take one final image and run it quickly through my printing, you know, the process I go through for printing. It'll probably take me maybe 8 to 10 minutes total, or we could just stop it, you know, at this point. That's totally up to you.
Well, we don't have any questions that are in the chat room.
Okay.
So I was hoping to open it up to questions at the end, but I'm just wondering, maybe, people who want to stay for the print section can stay. And if not, yeah, some are saying they're heading out. Interesting talk. So how about that? So
that's fine.
Remember, we're recording this so people can watch it later.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, well then I'll just move forward, and we'll still stop at the end for anyone who's left that wants to just ask me any questions.
Yeah, I'm getting now some people saying printing, yes.
Okay.
Good.
So
Thank you.
let's
Thank you, Mike.
Right. Let's take this image. Okay. Gunpowder River, another one of my places. I go to the same spots on the Gunpowder a lot, and I just love this area. So let's say I was thinking about really creating a nice looking print. And again, I'm going to just buzz through this pretty quickly. First thing I want to do though is get rid of this little snag in the river, which just I don't like. So I basically took my cloning tool and I cloned it out. And I just have to make sure that it's using an area that, right, like that, where it looks like a nice little path through the water. That's too bright. Ah, perfect. Okay. So I got rid of the little snag in the river. Okay. I'm just going to quickly do a black and white conversion. Because I love the silvery quality of the water, and I really thought it would lend itself to a really nice monochrome. But there's some work that I need to do to the image, right? It's got too much shadow value. I want to increase the texture in the image overall. I want to decrease actually the contrast a little bit. So let's just say for hypothetical purposes that I'm pretty much there. The only thing that I also did really quickly was I opened up the adjustment brush and I double clicked effect and I raised exposure and I brought out some of the shadow values underneath these rocks. Just there and there. So let's just say that I'm hypothetically ready to send this to the printer. Now I print off an Epson printer, which is important because everything I'm going to say, I think pretty much is referential to Epson. But before you even move into the print module, there's really an important cool tool in Lightroom, which is this soft proofing. And when you click on soft proofing, you're shown the image against a white paper, like the paper is that you're going to print it on, versus a black background. I don't know about you, but when I look at this image against a black background, it looks a lot darker than when I put it on soft proofing. The other nice thing about soft proofing is you can and should, and the first thing you also always have to do is make sure your monitor is calibrated every few months. That's very important. You can create what's called a proof copy, meaning that you can make some changes to just the file that you're going to send to the printer, not to the first. It's like making a different, like a new virtual copy. So the minute I touch any slider, once I click soft proofing, it's going to ask me in a dialog box, do I want to create a proof copy? And the answer is yes. So now I'm working on a virtual copy that is going to be the actual file that's sent to the printer. The other thing that you should always be sure of is that your paper profile is loaded and it is the right paper profile for the paper that you're going to use. In this case, it's a gold fiber silk paper, and there's my Epson 2880. You also want to make sure that you have this clicked, simulate paper and ink, because that's making all of the algorithms work in harmony with each other. And these two terms here, perceptual and relative, they really are more referential to color photography because they refer to out of gamut colors. But notice what happens to the histogram when I click on them. That's relative. That's perceptual. It does change because there is still color data behind the monochrome data. So that's just a matter of choice, right? If you watch the histogram, perceptual tends to increase some of the gray tone values and relative seems to diminish them a little bit. So I'm going to go with perceptual. Now I'm ready to send it to the print module. Click print, open page setup. Put your size of your paper in, whether it's a portrait or a landscape. And the most important thing, if you're running off an Epson printer, is to absolutely have the advanced black and white photo driver checked, because that is an amazingly powerful black and white driver, and that's the driver that's going to give you the absolute best results that will mirror what's on your monitor. You don't want really any other program interfering with the Epson Advanced Black and White driver. You set your picture size, your cell size. We don't have time tonight to go into aspect ratios and all those things. You set your pixels per inch, which I normally have to 240 to 300, somewhere in that vicinity. You can add some sharpening. I normally keep it as standard. They don't have a setting for luster, but luster paper is closer to glossy, so I have it set at glossy. And again, this is another place to check to make sure you have your paper profile loaded correctly, the gold fiber silk, the Epson 2880, and bingo, I hit print and I get a print that looks exactly like what's on the screen. So that's in a 2-3 minute overview, how I end up making really good quality, black and white prints. Does anyone have any printing question before I just stop share and turn my Lightroom off?
Louis?
Yep.
This is Mike. Just had a question on printing directly from Photoshop or from Lightroom. Do you see any difference from doing that?
I am just beginning to learn Photoshop, Mike, so I can't answer that question.
This is Tom Anderson. There's really no difference. There's procedural and vernacular differences, but result differences are consistent. It's essentially a consistent product between the two versions.
Good. That's good to hear.
Louis, where are you uploading your profiles to?
My paper profiles?
Yes.
Okay. So what happens with paper profiles is they automatically get loaded to somewhere on your computer that's been pre-chosen by your computer system, whether you're on a Windows or a Mac. I also have a folder on my desktop that's labeled paper profiles. And so once I've loaded a new paper profile, I know how to find it on my system. I know it can be a little confusing at first, but actually it ends up being in a folder of its own with all your other paper profiles. And then once that's been accomplished, and once I have it in a separate file folder, if I go to this place right here, and here's the paper profiles, and I click other, that's going to lead me to this is where all paper profiles are living on my computer system.
I see.
It's part of the spool driver configuration in Windows. And so if I wanted to pick a paper that I don't have preloaded, I would just pick from this list. And if I had loaded a new paper profile, it would be on this list because that's where it goes. So it's actually pretty simple process.
I may talk to you about that separately sometime.
Okay.
I can do it in Photoshop, but I can't do it in Lightroom. I haven't figured that out.
Okay. I'd be happy to help you out.
Hey, Louis, Tom Anderson, when you're in the soft proofing mode,
Yep.
do you use the before and after comparison feature?
Yes. Yeah, I do. And I just didn't do it tonight because of time constraints.
Well, that's almost an essential step in terms of working your printed proof copy.
I happen to agree with you. Yep. Because now actually, I don't like it split like that. There we go. Yeah, right now you can make any changes I make are going to be made to the right-hand side one, but not on the left-hand side one. And that's what Tom's referring to. You can actually watch and compare to your what they refer to as the master versus your paper profile that your image profile that you're working on. So that's a good question, Tom.
It was a struggle until I discovered that feature.
Yeah. It's really wonderful. I think soft proofing has really helped me a lot. And because the common complaint is, I'm going to just stop share now. The common complaint is that the prints don't look like my monitor looks. And any little tool that you can use to help you not encounter that problem you'll be very happy because it just saves you a tremendous amount of time and effort.
Yeah, and one other quick note, printing note. It's been said before, I think, but since we have a more complete audience, one of the things that really, really helps is turning down your monitor brightness before you start the printing exercise.
Yep. And also,
Because the sort of the common fault is that the prints don't come out as bright as you're seeing them on the
Right.
screen.
right. The other interesting thing to take note of is when you calibrate your monitor, you should have the ambient light in the room that you are usually printing in, because, you know, the ambient light in the room that your setup is in actually has a tiny effect on the color calibration process because it's reflecting the light that's coming into the room, whether it's incandescent light or sunlight or cloudy light or whatever. So that's also important that you calibrate it at the time of day that you normally do your printing in. So everybody can now unmute their mics, and, you know, if anyone has any other questions, comments, or topics that they want to talk about or whatever, I'm fine with that.
Well, number one, I want to say nice presentation.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. You know, I try to do in an hour and a half, you know, what should take, you know, a whole course at Micah.
Do you have a preferred calibration software?
I use the Color Monkey, just the Color Monkey Smile, the least expensive one. And it seems to work fine.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, $99. So.
Could I ask also, do you find, and I have this challenge, that I have to, on the monitor, almost add sharpness and contrast beyond where it looks okay on the monitor in order to get it to look okay on the print?
I haven't had that. You know, I upgraded my monitor. I guess it's been about almost a year now. And what was so scaring me about upgrading my monitor was was I going to be able to get it as finely calibrated as the monitor that I had used for years and years and years and years. And I was so dying for a bigger, higher resolution monitor. But that one thing stopped me for a little while. But then I finally said, yes, I could figure out how to do this. So I bought myself a really nice LG high-res monitor. But no, I haven't run into that. I run into problems just with converting images for digital display. Like I notice that I have to up my sharpening quite a bit when I'm putting something into visual pursuits, or some of the other software that we use at the club. But I don't find that true with prints. I find that if I follow the process that I've followed for so many years now, they really do very accurately mirror what's on my monitor. And when they don't, I know that there's something wrong, meaning that I've got a button check that I just haven't looked at for a while. There's something not right, because if you work on a system for years and it just seems to work, when it doesn't work, there's usually something off in the settings somewhere.
Well, and Louis, just to jump off of that, like I have two monitors, right? And what freaks me out is that when I use the calibration exactly the same, like I move the picture from one monitor to the other and it's completely different. So I have no idea which one to use to adjust my image before I submit for competition or print. And so have you ever found that? And like, how do you choose which one?
I don't work with two monitors, so I don't have that problem. But if I had two monitors, then that would be very confusing to me, especially if you're using the same tool to calibrate both. It should, you know, but I guess there are minute differences, obviously, between the displays of different brand monitors. So, you know, again, that is true. We're getting into like a whole, you know, it was
getting
like
meta.
It was like that whole thing with color when we used to get into those conversations with about color gamut. When Jeffrey Wolk was at our club a lot, he was very good at explaining that. And it's exactly that never really stuck in terms of even understanding what that means. But I think I have a better understanding now, because it really has a lot to do with your monitor. It's whether your monitor can display colors that maybe within your file that are undisplayable on your monitor. There's just no technical way to do it. And that's what out of gamut color means. So, but it took me years to understand that. So, as I said, there's so much more I have to learn. And being a member of this club has been so highly influential on me in so many ways beyond photography, but certainly within photography as well. But that's why I don't jump into the latest, I don't know, it's like swapping out skies. I know a lot of people are doing it and they do it amazingly well. I can't even tell the difference. So it's like, it's fine. But everybody, it's just like what we discussed before, taking pictures in public places. Everyone has to draw their own line in the sand about certain things in regards to their photography. So I'm just not, in certain places, I'm just not there yet. That doesn't mean I won't get there. It just means that I'm not there yet. I'm still spending time working on other more basic things.
Thanks for sharing your passion with us, Louis.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's something I like to
Louis,
do.
what do you use to convert slides?
I scan them first on an old Konica Minolta scanner, a dual Damage 4, which has got to be at least 20 to 25 years old. But
Is
it's a
it flat?
high-res scanner. It does a pretty good job.
Is it flat bed
No,
or
it's not.
slide?
It's a
slides?
cartridge type. You feed it.
Yeah, with slides.
Yes, you can put 4 slides in at a time. And you scan them each one at a time, and they end up being 4 separate digital files. And I think you could see from the slides that I used tonight that they really, they still came out pretty well. But in some of those cases, I really like the black and whites more than the color.
This is Mike. I have an Epson flatbed scanner that I use for slides, and they work. It works fine.
Yep. You have to just be very careful because you need to clean them like crazy. Because they attract so much dust and dirt, even if you've got them stored in the right way. Rocket blowers just don't cut it. That doesn't remove enough of the dust from them. So I've actually taken to more of a chamois cloth approach and a blower at the same time. You have to be careful because you don't want to scratch them. But, I noticed that when I scan a slide and then look at it, the sky is full of dirt and dust. So you just need to sort of painstakingly get that taken out.
Yeah, anecdotally, after I retired, one of the projects I made was to convert all of my film negatives to digital. And I had a digital film scanner. It took me 3 months to scan and clean up 3,000 negatives. Yeah, it was brutal, very tedious.
Yep. It's not a quick process.
Hey, Louis, thanks a lot, man. You did a great job, and you conveyed a lot of message, which I usually feel, but I can't express. But you did express it greatly. Very, very informative. Thanks. That was a great presentation.
Suku, my pleasure as always. I'm just looking forward to the times when we can all get back together again and have these conversations in person.
Yep. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Suku.
Yep.
Thank you, Louis. Good night.
Good night, Tom.
Enjoyable.
Yeah.
John Boy.
By the way, everybody's going to get a Survey Monkey survey and a handout.
You got 2 thumbs up here, buddy.
Yeah, so to recap. So I really, really, really would appreciate a quick, it's only 5 questions on the survey. It's all anonymous. I don't know who's saying what, but it's really important to me. I'm so used to being in front of a classroom as a teacher, like at Hopkins, that I've gotten used to doing them this way, but I really still prefer the other way. But getting the feedback that I get from the surveys, because I've already done this program about 8 or 9 times, has really helped me understand what people enjoyed, what they didn't enjoy, and it actually makes me tweak the program a little bit sometimes based on people's comments. So you'll get that probably tomorrow from Sandy.
Oh,
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
very
Wonderful.
Thank you, Lewis.
very
Thank you.
welcome. And I look forward to seeing everybody's black and whites for the black and white competition.
Thank you, Lewis.
And
Okay.
Lewis,
All right.
Yep, every single one of them processed in silver FX.
No,
Lewis,
We'll see.
Yeah, that
not
won't be
processed
happening.
at all.
Lewis, know that there are many compliments in the chat room for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it just people seem to be very grateful to
Well,
one of our own.
Well, I appreciate doing it, and it was nice being on home turf for a change.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was informative. I learned a lot.
Okay, well, if I got you to just think about that connection between your emotions and your work, I've accomplished my goal, because that's really what the thrust of the program was really about.
Well, you know, that's been one thing I've been working on, and you've been helping. Thank you.
All right, guys, good night.
I'm going to end the
Good
meeting.
night, everybody.
Okay, take care.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.